Debra Orange Socks. Jackson never imagined she would one day become one of the most haunting mysteries in Texas, known not by her name, not by her family lineage, not by the life she lived, but by the pair of bright orange socks she was wearing when the world last saw her alive. Before anyone knew the name Debra, before anyone knew her smile, her voice, or the dreams she carried, she was simply the unidentified girl on the side of a Texas highway. A life reduced to a nickname, a story frozen in time, a case that would remain silent for 40 long years. The night before Halloween in 1979, the early morning air was cold along Interstate 35 near Georgetown, Texas. It was the kind of night where most people stayed home, preparing for the next day's festivities. But somewhere out there, a young woman was fighting for her life, alone, unheard, unseen. At dawn, a passerby spotted something unusual along the shoulder of the road. At first, it looked like discarded clothing, but as he stepped closer, he froze. It wasn't clothing. It was a body. A young woman, estimated to be in her early 20s. No ID, no purse, no name. Only one striking detail stood out: a pair of bright orange socks pulled neatly over her feet. No other clothing remained. The sheriff's department arrived quickly, but what they found was as tragic as it was baffling. She showed signs of a violent attack, but there was no immediate clue pointing to who she was or where she had come from. The investigators searched for footprints, tire marks, anything that could tell them the last few minutes of her life. But the ground was hard, unforgiving. Evidence had vanished with the cold night wind. She was taken to the morgue as a Jane Doe, another anonymous victim in a decade filled with transient disappearances and runaway cases. The late 70s in Texas were harsh for investigators. No DNA analysis, no national missing persons database, no digital fingerprint matching. Everything relied on luck, memory, and paper trails. And for Debra, none of those worked. Detectives circulated sketches of her face. They called neighboring counties. They expanded outward across the state, hoping someone, anyone, would recognize her. But the young woman with soft features and orange socks appeared on no missing persons list. No family reported her missing. No one came forward to ask about her. Little did they know, her real name was Debra Louise Jackson, a daughter, a sister, a friend. And she was missing. Her disappearance had gone unnoticed by the very systems meant to protect people like her. Her family had been searching, but their reports never crossed the right desks. Their questions never reached the right ears. Debra simply slipped through the cracks of a generation that had no way to connect the dots. And so she became Orange Socks, a name that would follow her for 4 decades, a reminder of the moment she was found, and the life no one knew yet. This was not just the beginning of a case. This was the beginning of a long, lonely journey toward the truth. One that would span 40 years, survive cold case archives, outlive detectives, and wait patiently for the day science finally caught up to her story. Debra Jackson may have been silent on that roadside, but her story wasn't done speaking. For years after Debra Orange Socks Jackson was found on that lonely stretch of Interstate 35, the case spiraled into confusion, dead ends, and heartbreaking silence. Investigators tried everything the late 1970s allowed them to do, but the world simply wasn't yet built to find her. The sketch of her face circulated in newspapers. It hung on bulletin boards at gas stations, post offices, and small-town diners across Texas. People glanced at it. Some paused, some felt a flicker of recognition, but nothing solid ever came. No family called to claim her. No friend stepped forward. Her identity remained a void. The Williamson County Sheriff's Office kept her case active, but resources were thin, and the department was flooded with other crimes. Weeks turned into months. Months slid into years. And every year, Debra's file grew dustier, tucked into the cold case section like she was waiting for someone, anyone, to remember she mattered. But while officers tried, the world around them wasn't helping. Texas, in the late 70s and early 80s, was a place with endless highways and thousands of people coming and going. Runaways, drifters, hitchhikers, many moved across the state without leaving a trace. Reporting someone missing wasn't as structured as it is today. People simply vanished into anonymity. And Debra? She was caught in that era's blind spot. Her family continued searching for her, but their efforts didn't lead where they needed to. Records didn't talk to each other. Counties didn't share information. No automatic system matched the missing to the unidentified. So Debra's name existed in one place, while her body existed in another, and no one connected them. Meanwhile, investigators pursued every lead, even those that pushed the case in the wrong direction. At one point, a drifter known as Henry Lee Lucas falsely confessed to killing a woman matching her description. The confession led nowhere. Lucas lied to gain attention, wasting years of investigative time and energy. The Orange Socks case drifted into the realm of folklore, one of the most well-known unidentified victims in Texas. True crime followers speculated endlessly. Who was she? Why had no one looked for her? What kind of life had she lived before ending up on that highway? For the police, the biggest question was even more painful. How can someone disappear so completely that not a single person recognizes her? Still, something peculiar lingered about the case. Even after decades, investigators refused to close her file. Something about her struck them. Maybe the mystery, maybe the injustice, maybe the fact that she had a nickname instead of a name. They kept her physical evidence preserved. They kept her dental records. They made sure her remains were protected. They waited, without knowing they were waiting for a technology that didn't even exist yet. As the years marched forward, science began to catch up. DNA mapping, genetic genealogy, national databases, automated matching systems, artificial intelligence, facial reconstruction, tools that would have seemed like science fiction. In 1979, quietly became standard tools of law enforcement. And through all of it, the woman with the orange socks waited in silence, preserved, catalogued, stored, and ready. All she needed was someone to pick up that old file and try again. And someone finally did. A new generation of detectives looked at her case with new eyes. They weren't willing to accept that Jane Doe 1979 would remain nameless forever. They wanted to give her a voice. They ran her DNA against national databases. No hits. They uploaded her information to NamUs. Nothing matched, but they didn't stop. They turned to the newest frontier in cold case investigation, genealogical DNA tracing, the same method that caught the Golden State Killer. This was the technology Debra had waited 40 years for. This was what would finally break open the silence. The young woman once known only as Orange Socks was about to get her name back. When the new investigative team reopened the case, the file they pulled from storage felt almost frozen in time. Yellowed pages, old sketches, photographs from 1979, and reports typed on machines that no longer existed. But beneath all that history, something powerful was waiting. For the first time in 40 years, Debra Orange Socks Jackson had the attention of people equipped with the tools she desperately needed. The detectives submitted her preserved biological samples to a modern DNA lab. They weren't just looking for a match, because after decades, a perfect match was unlikely. Instead, they were searching for relatives. Genealogical DNA works differently. It looks for distant connections, cousins, half-siblings, extended family lines. Once enough connections appear, trained genealogists can assemble a family tree, working backwards from clusters of DNA until they find someone missing whose profile fits the unidentified remains. It's tedious, it's complex, and it's painfully slow. But it was the key Debra had been waiting for. Meanwhile, the investigators used new facial reconstruction software to reimagine her appearance with better accuracy than older attempts. They released updated composites to the public, hoping someone from her past might finally recognize her. For weeks, nothing happened. Then, months. Then years began creeping by again. But in early 2019, a breakthrough appeared. Not from fingerprints, not from police reports, but from DNA connections uploaded to public genealogy databases. A few distant relatives popped up. The genealogists followed one branch, then another, each time tracing the bloodline forward, narrowing daughters, cousins, sisters, mothers, fathers, who in this extended family tree went missing around 1979. Who disappeared from their life without explanation. One name surfaced: Debra Louise Jackson, a young woman from Abilene, Texas, born in 1956, reported missing by her family decades earlier. A woman who vanished in her early 20s, the exact age of orange socks. Investigators contacted her relatives. They gathered additional DNA samples to confirm the match. The tests were conclusive. After 40 years of silence, the nameless girl with orange socks finally had her identity back. Debra Jackson, a daughter, a sister. A real human being who had been lost in a system that didn't yet know how to save her. When officials contacted her surviving family, the news shattered them, both in grief and relief. After decades of uncertainty, they finally had an answer. They finally knew what had happened to the daughter they had been searching for. Closure, painful as it was, had finally arrived. And with the discovery of her name came a harsh realization. Debra had been living a life that society had overlooked. She was vulnerable, disconnected from the resources that should have protected her, caught in a web of circumstances that allowed her to disappear without a single alarm being raised. Her lost identity wasn't just a failure of communication. It was a failure of the era. But her identification was more than a personal victory. It became a symbolic moment in forensic history. Her case showed that no matter how old a crime is, no matter how long a victim remains nameless, modern science can still resurrect the truth. The woman known for decades only as Orange Socks had finally become Debra again. A life restored. A voice returned. A silence broken. But her story wasn't done. Not yet. Because the moment investigators confirmed who she was, they faced the next chilling question. Who killed Debra Jackson? When investigators finally confirmed that Orange Socks was Debra Louise Jackson, they didn't have time to breathe. Naming her was only half the battle. The next question loomed over the case like a storm cloud. Who murdered her? At first glance, the most obvious suspect seemed to be the same man who had once claimed responsibility. Henry Lee Lucas, the infamous serial confessor who admitted to hundreds of murders, many of which he never committed. His false confessions had misled investigators across the country, wasting precious years and creating chaos in dozens of cold cases. Lucas had confessed to killing the woman in orange socks back in the 1980s. He even provided details, but the timeline didn't hold. The evidence didn't match. The confession fell apart, and officials eventually concluded what many already suspected. Lucas hadn't killed Debra. He likely hadn't even been there. So detectives shifted focus. They studied the crime scene photos again. Every angle, every clue, every scrap of possibility. They analyzed the positioning of her body, the lack of clothing, the lack of personal belongings. They reconsidered traffic patterns, the timeline of that early morning, and the likelihood that she had been killed somewhere else and dumped along Interstate 35. The reality was haunting. Debra had likely encountered someone on the road. Someone who knew how to isolate a vulnerable woman. Someone who used the highway system like a hunting ground. In 1979, Texas highways were bustling corridors of truckers, drifters, hitchhikers, and late-night travelers. Many crimes from that era have never been solved because suspects moved constantly. They left counties before investigators even finished taking notes. Debra may have crossed paths with the wrong stranger at the wrong moment. Someone who would never be identified. Someone who left no fingerprints, no tire impressions, nothing. Still, investigators pushed. They interviewed old officers. They tracked down former suspects. They searched archives in multiple counties. They re-interviewed people from Debra's past. Each lead ended the same way. A door that opened into more darkness. But the biggest problem wasn't the suspects. It was time. 40 years had passed. Witnesses died. Memories faded. Records were lost or destroyed. People who might have helped no longer existed. The physical evidence, though preserved well, showed no matches in modern systems. Whoever killed Debra left nothing behind that tied them to her. Not a trace, not a hair, not a drop of DNA. It was a perfect crime in an imperfect world. Yet, despite all these barriers, the emotional weight of the case only grew. Now that Debra had a name, detectives felt a renewed responsibility, not just to list her as a solved identity, but to fight for the justice she never got. They hoped for a confession. They hoped for someone on their deathbed to speak. They hoped for a tip from someone who had stayed silent. They hoped, too, for advances in forensic science, new technology that could read what old tools missed. But as of today, Debra's killer remains unidentified. Her story stands as one of the most striking reminders of how easily a person can vanish in a world that wasn't ready to protect them. How someone can be remembered by a nickname for decades. And how technology can bring back a voice from the coldest corners of history. Her name was restored after 40 years. But justice? That chapter remains unwritten. In the end, Debra Louise Jackson's story became something far larger than the tragedy that took her life. It became a testament to the power of time, science, and unwavering human determination. For 40 years, she existed only as Orange Socks, a nameless girl lost on a highway, a mystery tucked into the cold case files of Williamson County. But when her name was finally restored, the impact rippled far beyond the walls of a police station. Her identification changed everything. Families of missing loved ones saw hope in her story. Hope that even decades-old cases could still break open. Investigators across the country revisited their own Jane and John Does, inspired by the way modern genetic genealogy resurrected the truth for Debra. And forensic teams began to preserve evidence more carefully, realizing that technology of the future might one day reveal answers that today's tools cannot. Debra became a symbol of the forgotten, a symbol of the underestimated, a symbol of every victim who waits, year after year, for someone to care enough to look again. Her family, after nearly 4 decades of uncertainty, finally had a place to grieve. They could speak her name again. They could remember her not as a mystery, but as a daughter, a sister, a young woman with a life stolen too soon. Her identity was restored, her memory reclaimed, her humanity returned. But even as her name brought closure, it also reopened a wound. Her killer is still out there, unknown, unaccounted for, perhaps long gone. Yet, even with that painful truth, Debra's story is not one of defeat. It is one of persistence. It is proof that no victim should ever be forgotten, no matter how long they've been silent. Her voice was buried for 40 years, but she still spoke through the science that identified her. And now the responsibility falls on all of us, storytellers, investigators, true crime communities, and everyday listeners, to keep these stories alive, to push for answers, and to support the innovations that make justice possible. Debra Orange Socks. Jackson deserved more than anonymity. She deserved the world to know who she was. And now, finally, it does. If you're watching this, and you believe stories like Debra's deserve to be told, stories of victims who waited far too long for their truth, then please like this video. Share it so her name reaches more people, and subscribe to help us continue shining a light on the cases that deserve answers. Your support isn't just a click. It's a way of honoring victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for listening to Debra's story. And remember, every share, every comment, every new subscriber helps bring more forgotten victims back into the light.